Okay, hello everyone. My name is Emily Rodriguez. I'm Senior Fellow with the Dana Foundation Career Network in Neuroscience and Society. Welcome to Neuroscience as a Social Catalyst, Engaging Communities with Brain Health. This is one of our Propose Your Own NeuroX event selections. And this whole series is meant to help introduce people to work happening in different interdisciplinary fields involving neuroscience. You can access more information as well as recordings of previous events at neuroxcareers.com. I'm going to drop the URL in the chat just now. But yeah, without further ado, I'll let Crystal take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Emily, and thank you to the Dana Foundation for accepting our pitch on this NeuroX event. I initially thought when I saw the initiative to blend neuroscience and society, how much that applies to the ever-growing field of brain health, which is why I'm joined by my two wonderful panelists that I've met through the Global Brain Health Institute. But we can talk about our career journey, the projects we're currently working on, what is our bridge and connection to neuroscience. And I also want to extend the invitation. We will open it up to any questions you may have in this group. If you'd like to put them in the chat as we go along, please feel free to do so. I will try to keep an eye on that as the panelists are engaging and sharing to answer your questions in real time. We will also hang back after the panel closes in the Zoom room if other people would prefer to interact with us in a smaller group or one-on-one. But I don't want to take up too much more time on the logistics, so we can dive into the content today. Emily, is all of the panelists spotlighted, or can we do that to make sure we get everyone pinned up before we start? I wanted to give a brief, have each panelist introduce themselves and tell you a bit more about their background. I was going to start. I'm going to be the moderator today and one of the panel members. My name is Crystal. My educational and background training really spans diverse social sciences. My bachelor's degree, I was a double major in gerontology and sociology with a minor in developmental psychology. I started a PhD program in adult development and aging and finished my master's with that specialty focus more on the cognitive aging side, and completed a graduate certificate in gerontology. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about career paths, but I did the unthinkable. I left my PhD program with one class left after experiencing a grand mal seizure and pivoted to finish my doctorate in behavioral health. It was through that particular experience I realized I was missing education and policy and systems and organizations that I wanted to know for the future work and projects I was going to do. And also realized I'd keep one foot in academia doing some things, but didn't think I'd be the full tenured professor. I always saw myself working with people in applied spaces, which is likely my background by training is very interdisciplinary. And that's the way I like to work in the projects I thrive in. So I really bridge all the social sciences from a life course perspective, and we'll appreciate sharing more about the insights and the work we do at the Virtual Brain Health Center. But I want to make sure you get a chance to meet our fabulous panelists. So I'm going to start with Laura. Laura, if you would like to come on and share your background and your experience and training to the work you're doing today.
Yeah, definitely. Crystal, you can hear me and everything, right? Nice. So my name is Laura Boy. I'm a gerontologist. I'm from Vancouver Island in Canada. And I mean, oh, wow, I'm really spotlighted. Wow, wow, wow. So I have an undergrad in psychology, a master's in health psychology, and a PhD in gerontology. I originally thought I'd do work with people living with schizophrenia. I saw that as a really big need. But then I went and I lived with my grandpa for a time, and he was in his 80s, and he didn't have cognitive impairment, but it really opened my eyes to what it's like for an older adult to be living in the city or in rural areas as well. So I switched my focus, did my undergrad honors thesis on dementia care, my master's thesis on not maybe the most exciting topic, but hip fractures. And then I did my PhD on dementia care again. And I did a fellowship in Dublin with the Global Brain Health Institute. And now I'm in Newcastle upon Tyne in the UK in the north. And I'm working at a research center at Leeds Beckett University focused on dementia care and brain health. And Francesca and I have a large program of research together, which is why we're on the call together.
Thank you, Laura, for introducing yourself. We're going to be digging a lot more into your work and career pivots. Francesca, would you mind introducing yourself to our group today?
Yes. Hi, everyone. It's really lovely to be here. My name is Francesca Farina. I'm from Dublin in Ireland, and I'm currently based in the US, in Chicago, at the University of Chicago. So my background, I'm trained as a neuroscientist. That's what my PhD is in. My bachelor's was in psychology. And then after my PhD, I did a postdoc in clinical psychology and then a second one in neuroscience. So I feel like I've been pivoting between the two for a long time. And then I undertook the same fellowship as Laura mentioned and Crystal's mentioned. We're all affiliates of the Global Brain Health Institute. And it was around this time as a postdoc, bringing people in for scans to test memory function, cognitive function, that I had a lot of conversations with older people about the things that they worry about, one of them being neurodegenerative conditions. And this was very pivotal for me in the sense that I realized people exist outside of their brains. They exist in families and social situations and environments. And so now my work has moved a lot more towards the epidemiology side, looking at modifiable lifestyle and psychosocial risk factors for conditions like Alzheimer's disease. So I moved to Chicago to Northwestern University first in the Department of Medical Social Sciences. And then earlier this year, I moved to the University of Chicago, where I'm jointly based with the Department of OBGYN, which has been a really interesting pivot in the sense that now my work focuses a lot on women's brain health issues and brain health issues that you might not traditionally think are brain health. But again, it's making me realize that so many things that happen in our lives are brain health, and brain health is completely life course. So very excited to be here today and great to see everyone on the call.
We appreciate you sharing your backgrounds. My inclination for the thought that I've challenged people over the years is I've yet to not be able to link something to brain health. When they give me a topic or something to do, I'm like, it comes back to some brain health issues. And I think broadly by training, brain health wasn't really even the buzz term. When I was in graduate school, we weren't talking brain health. Even my first few years in industry, the idea that you would talk brain health for people with neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and related dementias just wasn't even a conversation being held. So I look back in the past 10 years, how much more frequently this has happened. A few months ago, I did a presentation where I actually looked at how many times people Google brain health, and it's like a 10-fold increase, especially how often it shows up in PubMed, even as the term that's in research articles and the titles of research articles. So this conversation has really pivoted. I want to put it back to the two of you. I'll start with you first, Laura. Was why brain health for you and your work? Was something that just piqued your interest? Is it something you kind of fell into and now has you excited about it? It seems like from all of our backgrounds, it wasn't this linear process through education or experience that we're like, this is brain health from the start. It's kind of where we landed. How did you navigate that road?
It's interesting because I didn't even, in all honesty, even think of the term brain health. I was so focused on dementia. And I remember, so I did the fellowship in 2018, the Global Brain Health Institute fellowship in 2018, 2019. Prior to that, in 2015, I was a dementia advocate. So I co-founded a nonprofit called World Young Leaders in Dementia, so WILD for short. We went to the WHO's first ministerial conference on dementia, and I was absolutely obsessed with dementia. I was like, this is what I want to do. This is all I want to do. I can make a real impact in this area. But then I went to San Francisco and went to this Global Brain Health Institute open day. And I was like, oh, so brain health is a little bit more. But I remember even when I did the fellowship, having a disagreement with somebody in the fellowship because they said, why are we focusing so much on dementia? And I was kind of affronted, like, but dementia is everything. That's all I want to focus on. And then throughout the fellowship, I learned more and more about brain health. So I think although it wasn't linear, it was, you look at schizophrenia, which I was originally interested in, and then dementia, aging. And like you said, everything is tied to the brain.
Thank you for sharing that honest journey. I think we learn a lot of different pivots and insights that are like, this helps now shape the work I'm doing. Francesca, I first met you when I was actually on site in Dublin for the Global Brain Health Institute. So I'm going to ask you twofold. you were on postdoc when I was actually in the training. Would you mind, just for this group, to give them a point of reference? What is the Global Brain Health Institute? And give you the same question: how did you land in this broad field of brain health?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Global Brain Health Institute, and we can probably put the link into the chat. It's just gbhi.org. Ah, God, Laura, amazing. It's a global leadership training fellowship. So it's not like a postdoc. That was something that took me a little bit of time to understand as well. This is much broader. So the goal for GBHI is to really train the next leaders in any discipline who care about brain health and dementia and reducing the risk for and scale and impact of dementia worldwide. So you can be from any discipline. In our cohort, as I'm sure in the same as your cohorts, I was a neuroscientist. There were musicians, there were public health specialists. I mean, the list goes on and on. So really what the fellowship aims to do is to give a broad grounding in across topics that are relevant to dementia. So if you're not a neuroscientist, you will get some basic didactics around brain changes that occur in neurodegenerative conditions. For somebody like me, we had people come in who are public health policy specialists to talk about, okay, well, you're a researcher. How do you then translate this into a message that a politician or government official is going to want to listen to? How do you perfect that pitch? So it's a one-year training fellowship. You are based at one of two locations, either Trinity College in Dublin in Ireland or UCSF in San Francisco. And you traditionally spend the 12 months there with the other members of the cohort, engaging in the program, but also doing a lot of other things like developing a pilot project. So one of the great things about the fellowship is that you have opportunities to apply for funding, seed funding, which for an early career or kind of an emerging leader is an amazing opportunity to have your seed projects funded as a stepping stone to larger funding. So you do lots of other things. I would say it's really transformational. And I could speak a lot more about GBHI. I'm sure the both of you could as well. So if anybody has specific questions about the fellowship, happy to follow up on that. But I don't want to keep going on about GBHI. And then the second question was, how did I pivot to brain health? Yeah, for me, I think one of the things, and I agree, it's a term that we hear more and more about. I think I realized that talking about brain health as opposed to dementia is a different conversation and possibly a more open conversation. Because dementia is really scary for a lot of people. And whereas brain health it's a change in the narrative that brain health is something that we can all have and we all do have, like mental health, and that can shift across the life. So to me, as soon as this term started to appear, I jumped on it because of that reason. I think it starts the conversation off from a more positive, hopeful standpoint than I think dementia is traditionally viewed by a lot of people.
Thank you for sharing that. I tried to reflect back on myself of how did I fall into brain health? And I always like to say, I think it's been a lot of things that happened for me. But I used to think when I was younger, like, why is this happening to me now? When I had my grand mal seizure the semester I was studying for my comprehensive exams and getting ready to do my dissertation, it's like the 5-year plan goes out the window at that point in time. And it's starting to think about, well, what is the type of work and projects I want to do? And at that time, I was working with a clinical geropsychologist who I met through one of our university's networking events. I happened to be the admin that was checking in all the professors and everyone in the area that came to the gerontology conference. And she mentioned to me that she was looking for a grad student. She had the idea she wanted to start a brain gym in her clinical practice. So back, I want to say maybe 2008 to 2012, there was this momentum around early memory life interventions for people living with mild cognitive impairment, subjective cognitive complaints, early stage dementia. And it was, well, how do we make this shape in a clinical practice? So people that come to your traditional behavioral health services have this group component where we can talk about the science and some of these life skills that play a part in their well-being. For people living with very similar symptoms, depression, anxiety, people who are coping with aging or grief and loss, there was a lot of overlapping symptoms, but how can we give them these skill sets in an educational environment? And I was like, that's great. I run back to my office and I tell my counterpart who was in my PhD program, because he was the cognitive person in our program. He focused straight more on cognitive science. And he goes, oh, that sounds too fluffy to me, like too out there. And I remember I reflected on that and I was like, what does that mean? So I thought, no opportunity unwasted. I'm just going to fly her off an email. And I said, if you were interested, I would like to learn more. I needed to do a gerontology practicum, like an internship at grad level, and, would be interested to see what this would look like. And that's where it all changed for me. It was directly working with people in that science translation piece of, what does the science say? How can we apply this in our everyday lives? What does that look like in a traditional mental health setting here in the US? Because trust me, my other panelists, they're in Europe, they're, I would say, almost 2 decades ahead of us in a lot of the dementia care. By the time we read what they've been doing for so long and it translates over to the US to actually being in practice, there's a really big lag. And I attribute a lot to my mentor, Dr. Paula Hartmanstein, who took a chance on me because I was not your traditional grad student. I remember I interviewed her and she goes, why do you want a PhD? And I said, I don't know. I never planned to go to graduate school. I never planned to get a doctoral degree. No one in my family had ever really done that. It was just, I was following my interest at the time. I also graduated in the time of the job market crash when I was an undergrad. So I thought, maybe finish grad school and get more credentials and experiences to open up the job market for myself. It really wasn't this whole eloquent plan like some people have. But I wanted to share that story just to encourage. That was the opportunity my cohort mate passed on. It, she told me, tell a bunch of people. And I did. I went back and was yapping to the whole psychology department because I never thought it was the fit for me. And it turned out to be the great fit for me. I worked with her on that program for 4 years. It was the program I did my job talk on that I landed my first job in industry. So I'm located in Northeast Ohio outside of Cleveland. And there was a large senior living center that wanted to do a center for brain health. I remember seeing the job posting, thinking they want someone way more senior, but it never hurts to apply. I'm a grad student. I've been rejected more times than I can count. And next thing I know, I interviewed and I was the founding director of a center for brain health located on a senior living campus, the first one in the United States, and got to figure out what all these applied practices look like. What does the policy and regulations look like in senior living? How do I talk to leadership to get buy-in? And what does brain health look like in a senior living campus, from independent all the way through our memory care units? What does that look like for staff? What does that look like for our own leadership? I learned a ton. And I look back on that thinking I really would have passed on those opportunities. I thought someone else was a fit, but I just happened to be curious enough and thought, well, what if I explore it? And lo and behold, that kind of pivoted my whole career path to be more of this broader brain health. Because even when I was hired, I started that center in 2015. The focus was on the cliche called the worried well. People who are doing well enough, but they're worried about their memory. And if anyone remembers the mental health commercials, I can't remember what organization did it, but people were like walking through a subway wearing a t-shirt with their mental health diagnosis or multiple diagnoses, just to bring awareness around mental health. Well, that's who we target most of the time in brain health, at least on the adult end, is we want people before they're symptomatic, but people aren't out there waving a flag. Not all of them are talking about their concerns. So it was, what do we do, much to Francesca's earlier point, to bring people into the conversation? Brain health was something people were a lot more willing to talk about than dementia and memory care. I'm sure we're going to get to, ladies, busting some of the myths that we still have to combat in our work. But I just wanted to share that story. Mine was complete accident. And now when I'm challenged where people are like, what would you do career-wise if it wasn't brain health? I'm like, I appreciate that question, but I don't know what you're talking about. From my perspective, whereas I can see all these things being related. I know it's the space and places and projects I tinker with. It's still always evolving, but I know this is the broader field for where I would stay. So I appreciate the feedback when people challenge me, like, what else? And I'm like, well, there isn't anything else. I have stumbled into this way too many times by accident that this is the space. And now that our space is growing, much like Dana's talk around neuroscience and society, where can I contribute to that conversation and make a difference and an impact? And I'm so excited to dive in with our two panelists on that, because as soon as I saw some of the work they're doing in alignment with some of the initiatives for these NeuroX events, your work aligns really well. It may not have been your traditional linear path, but now it makes sense for the training you had, some of the lived experiences you've gathered. So Laura, would you mind getting us started and telling us what are the current projects you're working on and how is that related to brain health?
100%. And then Francesca will add to whatever I've forgotten. Do you want me just to talk about the projects Francesca and I have together?
You can, or if you want to tell us about your creative pilot project that you did in the UK for theater, that might be an interesting
Oh,
as well.
yeah, for sure.
I
Okay.
apologize. I don't remember the acronym for it, so you'll have to help me.
For sure, for sure. Okay, so Francesca and I have a large program of research together looking specifically at young adult brain health. So how do young adults understand their brain health? What are their concerns, fears around that, as well as how the risk factors associate to young adult populations for reducing your risk of dementia. Francesca will probably go a little bit more into that. But one of the things we've done with that, we've done several things. So focus groups, we have a large survey. And one of the things we realized is we need to find another way to get information to young adults that wouldn't necessarily be a peer-reviewed article or a blog or something stationary that people aren't going to use. So Francesca and I wrote a grant from Alzheimer's Research UK, and we received the funding, and we worked with a comedian and an influencer to co-develop basically a satirical comedy roadshow that went across the UK last fall that basically was, as they say in England, like taking the piss out of like brain health researchers and what's happening in the brain health scientific world, and bringing brain health education and awareness in a comedic format to young adult populations. We specifically went to venues that wouldn't necessarily have access to this information and serve populations that are traditionally underserved in health research and academia in itself. So that would be, I mean, that's one project. I mean, that project's finished now. If anybody wants to talk about comedy and brain health, I'm here for that. And even in the Global Brain Health Institute that Francesca talked about earlier, there's a few people or a couple people in there that are comedians that focus on brain health and comedy. That's not who I worked with, but yeah, we care a lot about our colleagues there. I think there's several other projects I have. I mean, because I'm in a Center for Dementia Research in the UK, most of my PhD students all focused on post-diagnostic support in dementia. So looking at what are the gaps in what the UK offers now for people living with dementia, and what are some ways that we can fill those gaps. That's mostly what my work is, alongside the young adult work with brain health.
I'm going to ask, you bridged comedy with like public health awareness. What was one of the biggest lessons you learned from that, or even the challenge? Because I think so many of us, if you're starting on your research journey or you're a couple different projects in, things don't always go as planned. So do you want to share a little bit of what you learned along the way, or what was your biggest takeaway from that?
Biggest takeaway was, even though I'm a decent researcher, I am not an event planner. So put someone in the budget who can plan events, because there's like a show going across the country with various locations with a team of comedians, actors, influencer. It's very, very pragmatically difficult. So that would be one of the things, is that if you want to do something new, that's really cool. Just make sure that you have the people that have that experience on your project, which is probably an obvious thing for everybody else in the room, but it took me a minute.
I appreciate you being open and honest, because so many times, even when you fill out the grants and you have this very well-defined research plan, you put it in the real world, and then you meet different challenges or logistics, and people change, and there's always things to learn, but it doesn't mean it doesn't cause a bump in the road somewhere. Francesca, I want to hear about your work and project, but I'm going to toss you this question first. Why are the two of you joining up to focus on youth brain health?
Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to start on. So that's perfect. So to add to what Laura said, so The reason we decided to focus on young adult brain health really was we had attended a conference that focuses on dementia prevention in midlife, and we were spending 3 days talking about all these factors that influence your risk: alcohol use, smoking, mental health, depression, and we ended up having a drink afterwards in a bar and talking to each other saying, but these are all issues that are affecting younger groups before midlife. And then we looked into the literature, and there seemed to be what we thought was a gap. So we talk a lot about midlife and later life in terms of dementia. We also talk about early life education. So a lot of people will know that link between education and cognitive function and risk for dementia later in life. But there seems to be this gap in between. So I'm talking about 18 to around 39 or 44, depending on when you think midlife starts. We like to think it starts later for personal reasons. And so we started diving into this literature more and just found that there were all these gaps in terms of what is known about what do young adults think about their brain health? Do they connect mental health to brain health? Do they think about dementia? Because we know that a lot of people are affected by Alzheimer's and other dementias. A lot of people have exposure through family, their carers. And so people know about this, but are they at that younger age group connecting it to their health behaviors at the time, or is it something that seems very disparate? So that's why we decided to start looking into this project. As Laura mentioned, we have lots of different arms. She's the qualitative side, I'm the quantitative side, which has been a great asset to the project, I think. It allows us to be very mixed methods. And so we do a survey. We have a survey open right now. Laura's also spearheaded many focus groups focusing in on some of these risk factors. So one of the projects that she's just finished leading in the UK is attitudes to brain health in people who have experienced traumatic brain injury through sports. And she's also leading a project with people who are living with obesity and their perceptions around brain health. So we do lots of different things. And honestly, the project is raising more questions than answers, I think. So every time, this started off pretty small and it's just grown and grown and grown. And now one of our focuses is trying to get a global perspective, a more global perspective. So we're aware that there are inequities, right, across the board when it comes to age-related conditions and all conditions. So we've been linking in with collaborators across the globe to try to get a better understanding of, well, what does brain health mean, not just in this age group, but this age group are very diverse. What does it mean for different subpopulations in different regions and within different ages? So an 18-year-old is very different to a 35-year-old and what they're focusing on. So that's something that we're really excited about, I think, but does raise a lot of questions. And then, of course, it's great working with somebody like Laura because she'll turn around and say, I think we should do a comedy roadshow. And you go, okay, I'm a neuroscientist, but sure. So that kind of openness and creativity has been great for the project as well. And we've learned a lot from our advocates. We have a strong public and what do we say now? We don't say patient anymore, PPI, PPV. Person and public involvement.
It changes over here too. I say PPI and then I usually don't describe what it means, but now you're
essentially advocates in this age group, right? People with lived experience, and we've learned and keep learning so much for them because we recognize that we're coming from a kind of a biased place in research, and a lot of the things that we might think are known are not necessarily so known out in the public.
I appreciate you sharing that. I want to highlight the link for your survey is in the chat. We may share it a few times because if I'm correct, you're still actively recruiting responses for age groups. You told me 18 to 39 about what do you know about brain health? It's really not hard, but if you would like to share and give some of your input, the survey link is there. And you can find more about their study on their website, the Next Gen Brain Health Project. So thank you both for sharing that. Any final thoughts before I jump into highlighting the projects I'm currently working on?
No, you go ahead. Maybe just to say the survey is open in multiple languages. So I think we have 8 languages, and again, it keeps growing. So if English is not your thing, we have other languages too.
I didn't share the link. I shared the project webpage. Francesca, could you find she's got it. Perfect. Crystal, what's your projects?
Oh, perfect. Thank you. A part of me was laughing when you said you work with, Francesca said she works with you, Laura, and you're like, let's do a comedy roadshow. I'm that person with my counterpart here at the Virtual Brain Health Center. So a little bit of background about our center is it was really a project that launched during COVID. I was the first time in my life, I was in between a job position, and my supportive husband's like, take a couple months. Well, that was January 2020, and we all know what happened in those first few months of January 2020. And so I sat there, and from what I knew in my training and experience, I knew this would impact the brain health of older adults. My background, my previous positions, I worked in the senior living industry. I worked with health nonprofits that served families of older adults in the community and worked with healthcare startups. And so I thought, this is not an overnight fix. People thought when I first mentioned that, I said, we're talking at least 2 years on brain health, because for the older adult populations I worked with, I knew that meant social connection gone overnight. I knew what the detriments of that meant for their brain. Then symptoms and conditions they're going to report to providers separate of COVID, even just now with the lack of accessibility they're having to things that were staple parts of their day-to-day lives, that social piece, the intellectual engagement, physical movement. And I really sat there and I thought, and I go, how can I help? What do I do really well that I might be able to do to help other people? And at the time, our fellowship had a modest grant. It was $5,000 to support an active response to COVID-19. And I thought, I know brain health. I know how to do programs in people. I know nothing about a website. So I applied for the grant to build the website and get us some functionality. Fast forward now, I can tell you I know way more about websites than I need to, but can actually, if you visit us now at virtualbrainhealthcenter.com, we have really grown in terms of being a resource. And at the time, the Rapid Response Community Grant was for my local community, so Cleveland area and its suburbs. And that was my contacts. And now we serve people in over 100 countries. Every state in the US have joined. That is one of the beautiful things of virtual programming. We get to have such a broad reach. It boggles my mind a little bit sometimes when I go in on the data, but to actually see it confirmed of people's IP addresses and their locations match, to realize we're one resource of many that people are looking for to take care of our brain. And we just want to make sure we do that really well in the science, education, and communication piece. And the way we do that, we do a lot of events. I know if you're here with Dana Neuroscience or other neuroscience organizations, you know of the annual Brain Week in March. It will be our 5th year. Each year we keep growing in impact and the amount of people who attend, but we call them our brain days. We do them throughout the year, and we really focus in on different facets of brain health, from the general neuroscience piece in Brain Week to what are the skills you can learn for your mental health around Mental Health Awareness Month. And so we look to piggyback other national days, since we're small, where people might actively be seeking out particular information about stress. Stress awareness days coming up here next week in November. So that's the buzz. And so if we can give people some of the science and that practical applied piece in their day-to-day lives, that's where we really end up being. I'm very surprised. We're known for some infographics that we created. I joke now, I have a migraine brain. After my seizure, I live with a couple brain-based headache diagnoses. And in the middle of one of my terrible migraine attacks, I walk in my office with like a little candle and on a blank piece of paper sketched what I wanted an infographic to look like. Because I was like, you give people an acronym that kind of sticks. And that was one of our most popular ones. It's brain care. So each letter means something you're doing to take care of your brain. And part of the irony is I have to live brain health every day just to manage my own neurological conditions. That's day to day. But for everyone in my family that I help support in my community, we're always talking brain health. And so even last year, I probably pulled to you, Francesca, a Laura moment. And I called my counterpart, Leanne, and I'm like, let's pitch a kid's book. And she's like, okay, let's do it. And it sounded at the time we were going really far out there, but kids read with their parents and grandparents. And our target audience, typically we support aging adults, is 45 and above. But we were like, there was nothing in the literature for young children. And at the time, I will share with everyone, my favorite role in life is being an aunt to my brilliant niece. And she would be coming home from school and she's telling me the things she does to take care of her brain. She asked questions about her brain. And I thought, she's in a small school system in a tiny town in Pennsylvania. She's learning some of these skills, but how do we make sure the learning sticks? Because if they're learning breath work, where she comes and shows me her high five and traces her finger and tells me how to breathe, they're learning these skills. How do we make sure those skills stay with us through our teenage years and through young adulthood? Because typically with other life transitions, prioritizing our brain care or mental wellness completely go off the table in those age groups. Even for adults that are parents or working families and caregivers, the thought of taking care of yourself first doesn't always come there. And it comes at a sacrifice of what you're doing for others. And so I just thought, well, let's get kids talking with their parents and grandparents. And so we did. We wrote and published a kids book on brain health that came out last October as one more way to raise awareness. I admit it sounded out there. The publishing company loved it. They had a very small percentage of books they accepted for publication. So we were thrilled that they were curious enough about brain health to spark that curiosity and conversations among younger children. And much to what Laura and I think Francesca shared in their work was, we went to the research. What are we talking about for young adolescent brain health? Now, our book is targeted for ages 5 to 9. We didn't find that much. Even if we're digging in the mental health literature, it was more about the practices, or we call them brain skills or the self-care skills. The language is, I would say, very similar, but depending on the discipline you come from is the way we're talking about it. But it's the same fundamental aspects of how do you take care of yourself? How do you move your body? How do you nourish? And so we went to what was in the research to what we could reasonably cover in a 60-page children's book about brain health to start that conversation. And at first it seemed like a big switch, but then it became a natural one. We've worked with the Florida Brain Health Initiative to put brain health education into their schools. They do most of that, but we help support them in some of their content and development of that for grade school. So they do kindergarten all the way up through high school. So if we were going to talk about cognitive fitness, what does that look like for a high schooler versus a kindergartner? What are some of these little key things we can give them and their parents as tools? So it has really broadened, I would think, our reach and our age groups. And if I reflect back on my career, my first job in high school, I worked supporting children with autism. I did applied behavior analysis at home for years. I worked 10 years with supporting families of those with disabilities at the home. So I always worked with the youth. My thesis project was actually adult services for developmental disabilities in Ohio. What happens when there's a very structured plan when you're younger, but when you go to retire out of the system, it's not as structured. And even found out through my thesis work that most of our county boards don't know retirement age in Ohio is 55 for someone living with a developmental disability. And what does that education and their rights start to look like? That was over a decade ago. So I started to then see how research and policy and programs all come into place. And that's where the bulk of my work has been, is in how do we translate this research into a program or an education or an initiative for a particular target audience. So we have done kids, we have done workplace wellness programs, community education for adults, whether they're psychologists or social workers, mental health therapists, people with a lot of different background where we can go more science heavy, but then figure out too, what are they using in practice to support their clients or the people that are under their service umbrella. It has been very fascinating. Although I think my main learning objective from all of that is my slide decks are usually the same for every audience. They don't significantly change. It's the way we're talking about brain health for someone in the workplace or a student group looks different than the way I'm talking it to people that come into our early memory loss programs. They have a diagnosis, they're living with it. We're still talking about ways that they can live well with whatever condition they do have. And for me, I think that's been the biggest shift I've seen to date in my work with brain health is when I first started in the field, if you had mental health, if you had neurodegenerative disease, any brain-related condition, we would not be talking brain health. And now I like to say we talk brain health is for everybody, I joke when I go into things and people are like, well, who do you work with? And I say, anybody with the brain, because essentially that has been where my work has landed. But we have those different experiences to be able to share different aspects of brain health with people and put it in. So it's been kind of an innovator space. I didn't necessarily think my training, this is how I would use my educational training and background, but it's been a very interesting journey. I think it's been one of those unexpected types of things, but here's the virtual brain health center. You can find us online and just see some of the different things we do. And we're always looking for different opportunities. Just like this event, when we saw they opened it up for NeuroX, was there's a lot of people working in brain health. It's not always this straight path, but how are people finding their way, and what are all these different disciplines coming from? Because I think that's one of the great parts of intersection of neuroscience and society is the interdisciplinary work that can happen and what each discipline can bring forward as a strength, and also tell you, well, this is a limitation of our current field of knowledge. This is where we want to go next, and what are those partners at that table looking like to drive that forward. So I hope that gives you a nice overview of some of our projects. I'll pause to see if there were any questions from the group, or Laura and Francesca, if there's anything else you want to tell us about another project that you might have going on that you haven't mentioned yet. I'll open that up to you.
I want to flag that Laura has kindly put the link to your book in the chat.
Oh.
She's already gotten there. Someone had asked. And also that there's another question in the chat from Vaishnavi, who asks, from what we've seen, how do young adults' views on brain health differ between different environments, countries, and cultures? Which I think is a great question. Laura, did you have any thoughts around this? I know you've done a lot of focus group work. I have some
Yeah,
thoughts.
I was thinking about your work with Peru, but for the focus group stuff, it's really, really interesting looking at especially the contact sport athletes. So the young adults, they're playing rugby, football, roller derby, boxing, anything, right? That's contact. And it's interesting looking at the differences in some young adults who are really, they're attuned to what brain health is, what traumatic brain injury is, what concussions are, and then other young adults who just have a mindset of I'd rather not know. So it's absolutely in the higher income countries that I've done the focus groups on, it's absolutely across the board, all differences. But I think, Francesca, the work in Africa and Peru would specifically be interesting if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so we wanted to roll out our survey in Peru with a colleague also from the Global Brain Health Institute. Crystal, you may know her, Maritza Pintado Caipa. She is a neurologist in Peru, and she works specifically with remote indigenous populations. And she loved the idea of the project, but said, well, an online link isn't going to work for this. So we ended up translating the survey into Spanish and then printing it out on pen and paper, and she brought it out to the communities there. And one of the things that came out, so one of the questions we ask about is head injury due to intimate partner violence, which the prevalent statistics are really high. And she said, well, this is really interesting, but we need to ask this in a different way for my community. And so we ask more about community violence. And that was something that when we asked about brain health and dementia risk, community violence was one of the main things that came out. And that's not something that we would have necessarily thought about initially. Another example I am thinking of is actually the work we've been the colleagues in New Zealand, Laura. So we've been chatting to colleagues from Maori population in New Zealand about this survey and about brain health, and they're super supportive, but the message that keeps coming back to us is that brain health is not a priority right now because there are other more pertinent priorities. And there is a sense from some younger adults that, well, why would I worry about brain health? I'm not going to get to a stage or an age where I will develop dementia. That's not something that's key for me. And then the other example just to give would be some conversations we've had with colleagues in the Caribbean. And one of the key focuses there has been climate instability. So when they think about brain health, they think about things like natural disasters, hurricanes, and things that we don't have in Ireland yet, at least. So it does differ, I would say. And being open to questions that you knowing the questions to ask is really important, or at least being open to knowing that you're not asking necessarily the right questions and you need to shift that perspective has been a big learning in the project for us.
Appreciate what you both have shared. And I'm going to toss this out to the panel because I see Naomi's comment in the chat. Thank you for sharing that there. Do we have an understanding of what brain health is? Does that vary? Because I think back to a lot of our training, even before brain health came up under dementia risk factors, under Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And so for a long time, that was where the discourse was, at least for a lot of that here in the US. And even until recent years, we would never say you could prevent dementia. We weren't comfortable with that. It's like you can decrease your risk enough for these certain factors like lifestyle, diabetes, hypertension, for the chance of later life cognitive decline. Now, I would say probably in the past 5 years, the CDC and NHS, for us at least, have had enough, our health service, has enough where we're saying, okay, we can prevent dementia through multiple lifestyle risk factors, but it still was up under that umbrella. So the idea that we're looking at typically 65 and above as the age is impacted, and we're trying to pull that down from the life course because the science shows changes for Alzheimer's can happen up to 2 decades earlier, depending on what biomarkers and things we are looking at. And we're trying to pull that down. But even what I remember from the fellowship is a lot of places didn't even have a term for dementia. And now we've thrown brain health out as another term where, at least here in the States, even hearing that, you have a general idea of what it means. Does that hold true in these other countries or in other areas where it's like brain health is this accepted term, or is there another one that kind of is more helpful?
I would say even in countries where we think there is a really good definition, it's still, people's understanding of that differs a lot. I totally agree. And I think this is the opportunity, but also the challenge for us in this space, because if we don't have a definition that people can relate to or understand, it kind of makes our job harder, right? Because then it's hard to know what we're talking about. So I know that from the literature, there's no one universal definition. I know this because I had to look it up for some paper revisions this week. So we're still working on that definition. The World Health Organization have a definition on their website, but other groups have other definitions. And I think that comes back to what we've all been talking about, and like, how do we engage people in these conversations? If we don't have a clear consensus definition of what we're talking about, how can other people? And also there's the risk of governments or other organizations looking at a definition and saying, oh, well, that's not what we do. So why would we give money to that? Because that's someone else's problem, right? That's a problem of old age, or that's a problem of early education, or whatever it may be. So I see it both ways. I think there's no definition. There's an opportunity, a great opportunity for us, but it could also be a challenge. What do you think, Laura?
One of my favorite jokes that Francesca has ever made is when we were talking to each other. Just wait, hear me out. When we were talking to each other about how we explain to our family what we do. And you know how in the Barbie movie, Ken is like, I do beach. And that's what she said. It's basically with her family, like brain health, like I do beach. And there's no understanding of what brain health is. And I think in all the interviews and focus groups we've done over the last 2.5 years with these populations, one of the questions we always ask people is, what does brain health mean to you? And I would say the real separating factor is people's socioeconomic status. So when people have more access to education, they are usually more aware of what is brain health and the complexities around that. But if not, oftentimes people will say, well, brain health is mental health. And then the conversation stops there. So I think it would be SES that's going to be the describing factor. And I agree with Francesca, a solid definition would be really, really valuable. Although we do have definitions, one that's agreed upon would help.
I can say from my work, that's been the same part, is how are we defining it? I was grateful when the World Health Organization put out a definition because it's much more holistic. And I apologize to everyone in the chat. I wasn't fast enough to snag it off the internet while I was listening to the other panelists comment. But the idea that it does include like physical, social, and emotional health, which really only expands on their definition of what health is from 1946. So if you look at the WHO's definition, theirs is a little more broad in the idea that we can function at our best. Yes, brain health involves mental processes, but involves this emotional and social component. So it's much more holistic than some other ones. I know even here in the States, there was funding that went towards a national brain health campaign. And I want to say 2015 or so, quite a few $1 million went there. And that definition has changed. So a lot of them used to focus on kind of a cognitive output. Your thinking's clear, your ability to remember, plan, and process information. It was much more that heavy on that cognitive domain. And then now I feel like so much of the conversation has shifted with the inclusion of the lifestyle risk factors people have, that it's not just the cognitive domain that's impacted, it's your whole body health, and that whole conversation of your brain is still part of your body. It is unique in what it can do, but there's still a lot of confusion. And I'm glad we're honoring that in this conversation, because usually when I chat with people, I'm like, yes, from my perspective, brain health is great. We want everyone talking about it. And after I've spent over a decade doing this work in communities, is recognizing how that conversation on brain health comes up, but also holding the space to honor that it is a personal conversation we're talking about with people. It can be around the culture that they've had and the language they use. We're asking people about their memory, their diet, which is food that they have inherited recipes for years. And then, depending on where you're sitting and getting your research from, sometimes it's very extreme. And then other times it's okay. How do we honor what we have learned from our families or the aspects of health that have been passed down? And how does this then come online in our conversation on brain health? And I think that approach is very different for the response you get from some folks. Sometimes it's that checklist of what do you think comes to brain health? Like you guys were saying, mental health, depression, nutrition. But then what are people's really main concerns, and what are the ones they're willing to talk about and take action on, which I think is where we're all sitting. Like, we're in this public health education awareness piece, and then how does it drive this action? Sometimes it's from policy, sometimes it's from funding, but it's also for us, at least in the work I do, is what can people do today that would ideally do no harm, but can get them some benefits for their brain or their overall well-being. And there is a lot that we can start to tackle, and then balance that. It could be really overwhelming for people whose information this is very new. I think one of the myths we try to bust in our work, mainly that I started in senior living. So I mainly worked with people 70 years and above. I work in an area where in Northeast Ohio, we have 12 universities, so a very highly educated group. Most people have multiple master's degrees, doctoral degrees, retired professors, retired healthcare clinicians. We have 4 huge hospital systems. So people that have had very rich and fulfilling lives and careers. But this new talk that we're having around neuroscience and brain health is not information they learned when they trained. And if they were working in their specialty within cardiology, this wasn't a term that came up for them in their day-to-day or in other aspects. It's just a lot of this science truly is new information. And so how do we then translate that for people of all ages, and to keep that in mind? I thought I'll throw out one more thing, since you both are doing a lot of the applied work. Is there any other myth you want to bust around brain health or neuroscience that, have posed some challenges, but also opportunities in your work for either one of you? Laura, do you want to go first? A myth you would like to bust around the brain or dementia?
I feel like half of my life is telling Uber drivers that dementia isn't a normal part of aging. So that would be one of them. I don't have another myth. I just want to say one thing though, and it's not about the Barbie movie. It's about how interested young adults are about brain health and dementia. So when we do this research, Francesca and I will ask people about what they're afraid of, what do they think is good or bad about their brain. And young adults are coming up with such interesting things, like variables that aren't even in the literature yet. Things like, well, how does lip filler and how does Botox affect my brain? And it's things that's like, that's not there yet. So I feel like they're already ahead of the curve for that. Francesca, what about you? What's a myth?
I'm not sure if it qualifies as a myth, but I'm just looking at the chat between Naomi and Giovanna, which is really interesting. And it's around this point about, well, if we advocate for dementia being preventable, there's a risk of stigmatizing people who get Alzheimer's disease as if they've done something wrong. So it's kind of tangentially related to this myth idea. And I think it's a really important point to raise, in that, in encouraging people to kind of do their part, as we all have to do for our own health, there is a broader conversation around structural and systemic barriers. And that conversation is tricky to navigate for us in this space because, if we put too much onus on the individual, then again, governments, other agencies will say, well, they drank alcohol and they smoked and they kind of brought it on themselves. And I know from the literature, for example, that public opinions around certain types of cancers are more or less favorable. So lung cancer versus breast cancer, if the perception is you sort of brought this on yourself. So I think we need to be careful so that we don't create a myth of dementia is preventable, and if you didn't prevent it, you did something wrong in your own life. And then maybe just really quickly to the point about what Laura said about young adults being super engaged. Yeah, I think, the enthusiasm and the enthusiasm for knowledge is completely there, and that's something that we can really capitalize on. And younger adults are really great advocates for a lot of things that they care about, like climate advocacy is one example. So if we can weave in the brain health narrative to that, I think people will take this and run with it. And I think we shouldn't be restricted by, we should sort of follow them in their enthusiasm and not be restricted by, oh, well, it has to happen in this type of conversation in this setting because it's a different age group. So we don't know necessarily what will work or what won't work. And we should be open to doing things completely differently and sort of reinventing the narrative as opposed to just tweaking what's been done before with older age groups or with older generations. Totally different environment now, living in, with social media and everything around us, even compared to when all of us here on the Zoom were children. Kids today, completely different.
Thank you both for what you've shared. I'd like to reference back, I believe Dana Foundation did a report around brain health, and they're always the stat I reference that more than 8 in 10 Americans are directly impacted by brain health issues. And if you check out that report, or at least the infographic that's showing you what are those conditions, you have depression, Alzheimer's disease, substance use, anxiety, stroke, learning disabilities, PTSD, bipolar, seizures, Parkinson's, schizophrenia, and other brain conditions. So I think we highlighted a lot what was in both of yours research background or what you may have done in post work and other work, but realizing how all these different areas are coming online as part of this brain health conversation. And there are quite a few, depending where you live, national surveys. And I like to summarize them the best that I can. Is every national survey I've read from at least 2006, I believe, is when AARP might have done their first one around brain health, always comes back that brain health is a top risk and concern. It's usually ranked secondary to heart health, which for anyone in the field, that's great for us because what's heart healthy is brain healthy. So if you're following any of those initiatives, that's great. Usually brain health will come in second. But the problem with that is people openly report they don't know what to do. They know brain health is important, but they don't know what to do. And then they also list who they prefer to receive information from, which I always thought was an interesting one. Is most people are not getting information per se directly from their healthcare providers. Sometimes it is, but they're looking to the experts and they're looking to organizations to be resources around brain health. And I would say, at least here in the States, in the context of a provider-patient relationship, the amount of time they can have to really do some in-depth education is very limited. And that's likely why it can fall on other professionals where they don't have as much as that time restriction, depending what type of provider you are seeing. But to let people know if brain health is of interest to you, it's of interest to a lot of other people. And they do look for people with this being their area of expertise where they can tell you some practical tips. So I'm going to switch this now for Laura and Francesca a little bit to this applied neuroscience. How is this showing up and integrating neuroscience into daily life from your work or your perspective in brain health too? How is that intersection happening for what you're seeing?
Crystal, you didn't say what myth you would bust.
Oh, my myth. Oh, you guys caught my top two. I think my top one that I always encounter is people think brain health's not for them. Usually they're thinking it's for someone else. They have a loved one, or a grandma living with dementia is usually the common one. Like they're thinking about it for their grandparent, and it's hard to pivot that shift that no, like your own brain health. It's all of us have a part in this conversation, and in different contexts or in different life scenarios. Of course, others' issues may be more prevalent than your own, but there's enough coming on. I think that shows if we're not taking care of ourselves, it's very hard to show up as our best selves to support people in the ways they may be leaning on us. But I always find that one where people, when I talk with them, they're like, that's not for me. And just to kind of ask some other questions around that. And I think to what Francesca said too, is being curious and having to pivot questions or how we frame it. It's different in a research study, but even in just, I think, Laura, probably for your focus groups, around the responses you get, where you want to dig a little deeper to better understand that perspective, because that helps us grow in our work, in our science communication, and the way we're thinking about projects and identifying even some of those barriers. So I think that's been the hardest one, is people just nonchalantly think it's not for them. So sorry, Laura, I'll reframe our question for us. So we're talking neuroscience in daily life. How is that showing up in the work you're doing or what you're seeing, even just the translation of broader brain health science or neuroscience into day-to-day for people? And you can talk about any group, but just, I think broadly, how's that showing up in both of your works or projects you're doing?
We've been trying to find resources to share with people, with young adults, right, Laura, for this project specific to young adults. And we see there's a lot of development around, say, apps and things for either children or teenagers, or short courses that some schools are adopting, which is amazing. And then similarly for courses aimed at people in midlife. I know there's a lot of massive open online courses. I know the University of Tasmania just had theirs accredited by the Alzheimer's Disease International, which is pitched at, what is brain health and understanding the risk factors a little better. So there's some of the resources that we tend to point people towards, but it's been hard to find something that's geared specifically to young adults in a way that they can integrate easily into their daily lives, because it's an extra thing that they're being asked to do, right? And we're all being asked to do. So I think there's a lot of interest in this space, and a lot of things are popping up, but one hasn't really stood out to me above the others, at least in the work and the age group that we're focused on specifically. Laura, I don't know if you...
No, I was going to say the same thing. So at the end of the survey, or different aspects, different arms we have of this project, we'll try to link in young adults with resources. We've even asked our PPI members, and our PPI members are terrific. They're all over the world. Some are living with brain health issues. Some have family members with brain health issues. Either way, everyone's really engaged. But it's finding those resources are really, really difficult, specific for our population, again, to caveat that. The other thing I'll say is that there's a real appetite for them to exist. So, for example, if you mention something like PTSD and the link towards increased risk of dementia later on in life, automatically people, so specifically young adults, maybe young adults who are experiencing PTSD, are going to, then their ears will perk and they'll be like, okay, I should learn more about brain health. But those resources aren't in existence yet. They're not in HR training modules when you get a new job. They're not in school programs. So there's no young adult focused brain health thing. And I think that's where, sorry to go on a rant, where we get a real risk of misinformation showing up. And Francesca hasn't mentioned this yet, but she's got a really good line of research looking at fear of dementia. And I think if we don't have those resources ready and validated, not maybe scientifically validated, but validated by experts in the field, we do risk misinformation and fear popping up further.
And just to quickly add to that, I mean, obviously this is just our perspective. If somebody's on this call and they're like, oh my God, my resource, and they're not mentioning it and they don't know, please share it with us. We are so open to being completely wrong on this. And I know that there are already some resources going into the chat, like podcasts and different things. So please share with us, and maybe we can send around the resources from the chat after the call. I don't know if that's possible, but just to keep building this library of resources together, because, you know, we're in the community, we're all a part of this community, so it will be great to share them.
Yeah, Crystal, does the Virtual Brain Health Center have a resource library? Because Francesca and I won't have that with our research project, but do you have that?
Yes, I was actually just going to say, and that's what happened. So when I say our projects are always evolving, I sat there and I looked one day and I thought, I have spent, 15 years or more, like from undergrad networking with people and then in career and talking to people. And I'm like, I know organizations or I know an individual that studies something very specific, like addiction in the brain. Then when people come, it's like an email to them with here's who to talk through. And I thought that's really sad because I'm the only one like holding this information, but I have a lot. So we finally just have launched a global resource directory. We're at the beginning stages of building it around brain health, but we wanted to get people, I guess I could have said this as a myth too, of about Dr. Google and brain health. People seem to Google, and that really does elicit a lot of fear and information. So how can we make sure we get them to vetted resources or organizations that then have this information? So we just built out our brain health directory. We're getting ready to actually start the advertising in November, but we focus on brain health, healthy aging, and broadly memory care. So we do have a tag in there for some youth initiatives. I think much to what you guys have shared, targeting your age group of 18 to 39. Still haven't come across too much, but I can tell you all the different things people have sent me over the years, or I see a newsletter. I try to then go in and diligently add these organizations to the resource. People, if you are part of an organization or you have an interest, you can go and put in your listing. I like to have the caveat we use discretion, meaning not selling you supplements or particular products per se, but where people can actually be a resource for you. If you are wanting to know about biofeedback in the brain, there's someone you can email that will be responsive. So we're really trying to build that collaborative community. And I think that's been the nice part with Virtual Brain Health Center is just being able to respond to different needs that have popped up. And one other way we do this, we do have a podcast. So if anyone listens to podcasts, we keep them around a half hour of diving into these different topics of brain health. I'm putting Laura and Francesca on the spot, but you'll find an episode from them coming out early next year around youth brain health. I've invited you, we've never scheduled. So now I'm taking them up on it officially. But you'll see these different topics when people ask. And I think that's been the balance of, you know, how specifically does the mind diet support brain health? How is oral health linked to your brain health or your hearing health? And hearing from these experts, because I think a lot when you go to the field, everyone finds the Lancet Commission reports that say these are the 14 risk factors that mitigate up to 45% of later life dementias across the world. At least now we're at that percentage, right? It changes, but there are all these other factors because not items you won't find on that list include diet, and include long COVID, include some other mental health issues. You know, these are big ones that have a lot of research base, but still sleep is not included on the Lancet Commission. And I would say for anyone here, if you're talking to your provider or you're in a focus group, even being asked about brain health, sleep and diet are usually the top ones people have working knowledge on, but you're not going to find it on that risk factor list, not yet. But to really see how quickly the science does change, and I think much to Francesca even saying, I believe in your group, just these different risk factors that are coming online for younger groups and activities they're doing or things that you're exposed to. I won't be surprised that eventually we'll be talking about social media use and consumption. It comes online as part of the conversation in a different way, but likely to a point where we'll be putting out different research-informed recommendations. And one last thing we do at our center is I finally thought there's a bunch of us that read neuroscience books from, you know, best-selling list or just ones from authors or researchers. We do an informal monthly, I call it our Neuro Nook book club, where we dive in. And we've been very fortunate. We've had 4 authors join us last year. Dr. Mike Rucker came and talked about what is the science of fun? How do you make fun an intentionally daily habit? So sometimes we really get to hear from the authors, and other times it's a nice informal way, shorter than our chat today, to hear from other people, get some application from the book, and see if there's something we can do with it. And what are those takeaways? Because I think my summary of this conversation so far is we don't really have a brain health prescription. where we can say, these are the things you do and break it all down. On our website in our infographic library, we do have one around, I tried to dig in the science because people told me I have 30 minutes a day. What can I do for my brain health? And I was like, oh, challenge accepted. What does the science show for where we can go and get, small intervals that start to show to have an impact? And how do you spread that across different domains? So we went to the evidence to try to find, mindfully, we can probably spend 30 minutes a day on our brain health. Where should we invest that time? And of course, you'll see exercise in there for movement. Of course, we can always do more than 10 minutes, but our CDC shows even 5 minutes of movement starts to both benefit for your health. So where are those intervals where you can start and then start to have gains? So I'm always appreciative for our community or opportunities like this where people do pose us with those questions and we can dig in the science and try to help with that application piece. Our book club has asked us that. We're due 14 months now. I had to think quickly there, but trying to think about what are the prescriptions that have come out of that. We read the very popular book, Your Brain on Art. And their prescription is to do art 20 minutes a day and to do 2 immersive experiences a year. So to go out to a museum or maybe those art shows where you're really the immersive environments like the Van Gogh and Monet that kind of have been traveling across the world. But 20 minutes a couple times a week, and then the idea that 2 experiences a year is enough to get you started that exposure. Bare minimum, but from where the science can show, that's where you can start to have gains. So we're working on coming out with one with that, just based on the books we've read. Where are there some very actionable steps that we could be mindful of? I challenge all of you to think, do you intentionally add fun to your day? I know for me, it's fun being on this panel here with all of you and in this group, but where are the other places you have fun? And what is on your fun list that when you need to do an uplift, and what's the science behind that? And to help bring that more to your level awareness. And yes, our book clubs are online. Luckily we meet on Zoom. And so it gives us a bit of a global reach there too. So hopefully there's just some other ways. And I think that's really how we design a lot of the work or initiatives we go to, much to I think Laura and Francesca as well, is how can we start to scale this? Because I kept thinking, I have a network, I have a Rolodex. Can someone help me build the tech so then other people can come and search this? So it is something other people can use, and trying to learn and think about the problems we have. And is it something small, I will say low cost and effective, we can build that can be a useful tool to others, and start to see what that looks like. And for some of that, it was just finding a lot of people read books around neuroscience. Well, isn't it great to talk about that with other people? And I do say we are a little different. There is no requirement to read the book before you come. You can just come as you are. If you've liked the book cover or you enjoyed it, that there's still some experience you can share or something you can take away. We have a really nice group in that translation space. But I think we're seeing more and more of neuroscience showing up in daily life. I'm going to go on a limb. Most of you are probably on social media more than I am. But I always joke that if I was looking at content anywhere I shop, there is something about the brain around or neuroscience. There was one that was on a bottle opener about your brain, like to get to sleep for the beer opener. I was like, that's really bad marketing, because that's not true. You're not going to sleep better after you have alcohol. But these things start to pop up in day-to-day lives, or when you're out and about, or conversations you may have with people, and how to be a good resource, or to say, I don't know, but let's go look here, or this is a good question to both of your respective work to drive research forward. We really don't know what youth brain health looks like. So what can we start to find out, and how important of a conversation that is to have? So I want to honor that for all of us. I'm going to pivot now. We're getting closer to the end of winding down. What would you two offer as mentorship or career advice for either the work you're doing or this broader brain health science space? Is there any advice you have for people that if this piqued their interest, or they're looking to continue education or broaden their network, what advice would you have? Or I'll frame it, what advice do you wish you were given when you were younger going through these transitions that would be helpful to you?
I think Francesca and I both took 2 very different ways to get, of course, all 3 of us, right? We all took 3 different ways to get where we are. I think for me, because I like, I don't want to say I like people because I don't really, but I like networks, I like collaborations. And so for me, getting involved in groups to the detriment of my, I would say my other skills that an academic should have, like publishing and writing, I feel like I'm just getting a handle on being decent there. Whereas like building a team and a network, like I said, World Young Leaders in Dementia, and getting involved in different networks like the Demon Network, Alzheimer's dementia research. So I'll drop some links in the chat there about networks that I'm affiliated with or I've really found valuable. So if I would say my thing would be groups. I'm sure there's more things, but Francesca, what would you say?
I completely agree with you. I think groups and interdisciplinary groups. So even if you think that a group is doing something completely different to what you're doing, that's probably a good thing because we can get very siloed. So really doing the GBHI fellowship was amazing to me because I had to keep explaining why neuroscience is important, which is a good thing. And then it makes you really hone in on why it is you're doing what you're doing. The other thing I would say is you don't have to work with people who are not nice to you. And there's a sense sometimes with senior people, and there's a lot of important people around, and some of them just aren't very nice. And I think it took me a little time to realize you don't have to suffer through that. There are a lot of really accomplished, amazing people who actually happen to be nice humans too. And so I would find those people and collaborate with those people and make those people your mentors and avoid the others. And maybe to just be careful about overstretching yourself. So being open, it's a balance, right? But that was the other thing, especially as you're building a career, you want to say yes to everything because everything's really exciting. But then you don't have time to do your own stuff for brain health, whether that's exercise or keep your life outside of work, because, you know, we love what we do, but it can't be everything that we do.
I appreciate what you both have candidly shared and learned along the way. I think if I reflect back, I would never go back to my grad school schedule. Like I look at it, I was like, what was I thinking? I took extra courses every semester. I carried a 12 to 15 course load here in the US. And I worked 3 or 4 jobs to pay the bills to go to grad school. And I look back and I was like, no wonder why I ate like crap in my sleep. I'm like, what was I doing? And I just think of times, there's times in your life where you like can make different decisions. I was like, I should have scaled it back. And I was always the yes person. I still slant that way where I'm like, yes, let's figure it out. But I slowly learned that saying no to things allows me to say yes to the things I'm really excited about, or, hey, I don't know enough about that yet, but I'm willing to invest my time here. And for an example, there was one company I serve on an advisory board, a clinical oversight board. And, you know, it was one, oh, it's this hour commit, could you do it? And I was like, well, I'm excited about it. I'm reviewing messaging that's going out around mental health and brain health for accuracy, and also to give them ideas for their library, or what are some of these applied skills that could still broaden their work. And I'm like, yeah, I'll sign up for, 16 hours of work because it's something I'm passionate about. And that's the way I want to volunteer and give my time. But I've also learned if I didn't say no to some of those opportunities, my time would have been very restricted to be able to, where it's like 16 hours, there is no way to fit this in, or whatever that commitment might be. So I did slowly learn that along the way. And I think the advice I would also offer to other people that I learned in grad school was, it's okay to be on a project and say, learn that lesson, not for me, and go to the next project. Because I think for a lot of the times it was, at least at the time when I was there and it was structured, like you would join a team and then you were on that for your 5 years. Whether you liked the research or you were interested in not, this is kind of where you were. And I always played in that space of, well, I'd like this experience. Like I did a lot of training in qualitative methodology, which required me going out of my traditional program and into other departments in order to do that. But I was like, this is a good skill set that I want to have. And I can't tell you at the time when they're like, are you sure you want this course load and you're doing this, that I'm glad I listened to my own path, because now that I work in industry, most of the data I usually have to get and work with is qualitative, because when I work in senior living or even in health nonprofits, they don't have systems for data collection. So you're starting to look at, what do they have? What is this data loosely defined? And how do we make it have relevance to guide our service and our product development or service provision. You're looking at numbers that aren't traditional data, like you're going to be trained in the research, and you're trying to make sense of them, and you're writing them for compelling grant reports, for funding, for donors to want to support your work, or enough to make a little report to take to your CEO to say, like, my project's important, and really trying to make it out of numbers that do have meaning, but you have to be the translation piece for a lot of that. So I think when you enter different sectors, to just recognize sometimes if you're on a project and you only want one specific skill set from that, that's okay. And you can really tell someone, like I went into them and said, I really want to understand how to analyze qualitative data. So that was the part of the project I looked at, or I mentored it. And it wasn't, I needed to spend the whole time learning all the software to do the analytics. It was, I could come in a little more focused and get that experience. And that was something I slowly started to learn in grad school. And if you can't tell from my own background, I jumped around a lot on different projects. And then there was a lot of time I would be invited. So because of the networking I had, as soon as people knew I had my master's degree, I was offered to come teach at university, another local university, to pick up a grad class, because you can teach some of them with a master's degree. And so it was nice that other people that I had networked with or had relationships were willing to open up other opportunities for me. And so I used to joke, I loved going to conferences and hanging out with like my colleagues and my peers. But like when it came down to mealtime, I made myself sit with a table of complete strangers, which is very anxiety provoking for me. It's completely out of my norm. I want to hide in the back of a room. I want to sneak in just on the table, but I forced myself to do that and meet people. And that really opened up a lot of career doors. I just would tell colleagues, I will see you at the networking, but at the luncheons and those types of things where you really have opportunities to make connections or find new mentors that are outside of your school or your program that you can talk to. I did that. At the time, it wasn't as strategic. It was just, I knew I needed to get out of my own little box. But when I look back, it opened up a lot of different opportunities, and they talk about mentorship differently, but people that would mention my name when I wasn't in the room, or say, you know what, if you're looking for a student and it's outside your university, I know someone you could, talk to that might share it with other student opportunities. So thinking about some of the things you're doing and being intentional with that, I think was the most helpful for me in grad school. Especially you're already utilizing, student government funds or some departmental funds to go to a conference, how to really get some mileage out of that. And then after a while, I also learned you don't have to go to every session. You will burn out. I did that a few times. I couldn't understand why like conferences were so exhausting when I came home, but have learned to find a good balance for that in networking. So it becomes, yes, it might be tired, but it's the energy that's going to fuel new projects or exciting conversations. And, a network of people that could support me if I reach out, or if they reach out to me, I could say, oh yes, here's something, or here's someone you could talk to, or I know this student or this person, to try to do that. So I think that would be my advice. I probably should have told my younger self. I think I lived through it and then reflected on it, probably like you ladies as well. But it was just nice. And I would just reiterate that you can ask for specific skills being a takeaway, and then to take on a huge role in a project. Sometimes a lot of people are open to that, and that you can look for professors outside of your own department. Most of my work I did was in sociology. That was where most of the qualitative methods were, was in sociology and anthropology. So got exposure to another discipline and different faculty, but was, a skill set I was seeking out to have that at that time was not prominent in my psychology training. And so see what you're looking for. You could make that list and reach out for people. I know we're winding down, so I'm going to just open it up for Laura and Francesca. Are there any final thoughts or takeaways you want to have as we're winding down our conversation about the intersection of brain health science and applied neuroscience in daily life from your work, or for people who maybe now we've piqued their interest and think brain health science is really interesting? What advice you would offer to them, or final words?
Can I super quick just go back to a question from Giovanna in the chat? Real super quick. No, Laura, no. What's a good way to be a mentee? I just think that's such a great question, because we talk a lot about like how do you be a good mentor and what are those skills? Do either of you have really quick thoughts on what's a good mentee?
I'm coming at it from feedback my mentors have given me. And, you know, some of the better relationships I had was they knew once they told me to do something, I'd do it. So, you know, having that follow through, and even in industry, my first boss, he supervised almost 20 people. He never took meeting notes for my meetings. He never had to like record them or do any of the things because he knew when he told me I would come back. Because I remember at one meeting he did, and he was so used to doing that with everyone else. Like everyone else, he had to give the checklist of what they're doing. And I just did it. And he goes, Crystal, this is so nice. And I was like, oh, I thought you follow through on what you're supposed to do. But I realized that doesn't always happen in the real world in practice and with teams. And so that's the way I always tried to show up for my mentors, was if there was something we discussed, I would have the follow through. And when life did happen, I would be honest with them. And I'd say this, you know, if it's midterms, finals, or this semester is a little rough, do we have some flexibility with this? Or we might need to find someone else to carry that out. I think it was something I learned really early on, in respecting their time as well. And I never realized too how many people are actually willing to be a mentor to you if you ask them. Like sometimes it's in academic settings, you have your advisor and you have other ones, but when you meet other people, if you could just say, is it okay if I would talk with you, you know, for 30 minutes about your career path, and ask them questions that pique your mind? Or, you know, I'm start coming up on graduation, I'm thinking about networking, what has worked for you? And find a couple of those ones you can keep in your kind of back pocket. I like to call them, now they've all been virtual coffees, I think, on Zoom for what, 4 or 5 years now. But there are a lot of people that are very willing to do that. And you can make a good use of people's time. Even if they give you 15 minutes, you can ask a lot of questions and do that. So think about those formal or informal mentees and follow through. I know, Laura, you're in the academic setting where you have mentees. What makes your good mentee stand out?
Oh, I mean, I think that's different. I think that, I mean, because Francesca's also in the academic setting. I think there's mentees, there's students, which are something different, but mentees, I don't know, they're just good people. Like they're nice. What would make a good mentee? Yeah, respectful of people's time, 100%. I don't know, Francesca, do you have anything? I have one more thing I want to say after, but do you have anything for a good mentee?
Yeah, I think Crystal covered I think you both have. The only other thing maybe I would emphasize is just being direct about what you need from a mentor. That took me a long time to just ask for help, even when you have a mentor. And for a lot of it, I would be like, it's fine. No, I can do this. And oftentimes people are very busy. So just being upfront and direct about, this is the specific thing that I need, even if you only have 15 minutes, help me with this. And kind of asking for that direct help took me a very long time. Laura, what did you want to come back in with?
I would also add to that, and then I'll say my final thing, is that when you ask and you're direct and you ask your mentor for something, if they say no, don't take it personally. It's just because of capacity. But usually, and I'm speaking from experience, usually whoever is being your mentor or whatever you want to call it is like just at capacity, but they want to help, but they can't, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, the last thing that I wanted to share was this network about diversity and brain health. I know we talk a lot about this in our work, but as I'm not a neuroscientist, but like working with neuroscientists, working with all of us brain health researchers, we always talk about diversity, but it's good to know like what are the networks around that focus on this as well in the brain health area. So I just shared that link. That's it.
Any final thoughts as we round down, Francesca? So our plan is we will stay on. If people would like to come on and unmute and interact with us, we will be able to stay on here in the Zoom room, but kind of want to formally close out this panel. And then I'll hand it over to Emily if you have any final thoughts before we kind of shift to the more informal part of this. But any final thoughts on today's discussion, Francesca, or words of wisdom you'd like to impart for people who have this interest of brain health science mixed with applied neuroscience, or who knows else, whatever their background might be, policy, law, healthcare? How can they all be a part of this conversation?
I think jump in and don't be put off by the fact that, you know, more senior people are doing things in a different way. Maybe we're a different generation. And so let's just be loud about brain health and try lots of different things and just start somewhere as being part of, I mean, this is a community already, so we're all in the community. If somebody emailed me after this and said they were on this call, I'd be like, oh yeah, completely. So just use the networks that you have and don't be afraid to reach out to people. Most people say yes.
Yeah. I'm going to just point out, I know all three of us are active on LinkedIn. If anyone wants to go there to connect, that's one resource. I know we've put a lot in the chat where you can find them, but you can find any of the work or the projects that have been mentioned that have the websites. They will be there. Laura, any final words before we wind down?
No, that's great. I have nothing. This has been good. This has been great.
I thank you all for investing your time and your energy and being an active part of this conversation on brain health. I know for the three of us, this is our normal talk and what we get to do every day. So it's exciting when there's other people who have an interest where we can kind of challenge what we know in the field, grow, learn from one another, and think about too, what will the future of brain health science look like, not only for the youth, but for all of us if we were to join this conversation in just 5 years from now. What is the progress we would all envision to see? So I want to honor this was an investment of your time and energy. Hopefully you learned something here that can take away to support your own brain care or the work that you're doing. But thank you all for being with us. We appreciate the collaboration with the Dana Foundation for this NeuroX event. And Emily, thank you for being the most gracious host. Do you have any final words as we wind down this part?
No, just thank you all for being here. This was wonderful. This was really great. I'll stop the recording in case people have questions.